All right, today we're diving into a really fascinating and challenging text by the 20th century scholar Bediüzzaman Said Nursî. It's called The 12th Flash, and it tackles some really big, head-scratching questions about apparent contradictions between sacred scripture and the world we see. Everything from starvation to the structure of the cosmos. So, how does an ancient text hold up against modern science? Let's find out. So, the whole thing kicks off with this foundational verse from the Qur'an. And it sounds like this ironclad promise, right? A divine guarantee. God provides for every single living thing. It's a promise of universal sustenance. But, that immediately brings up a huge, obvious question. And there it is. That's the big paradox the text jumps on right away. I mean, if that guarantee is real, then how on earth do we explain the brutal reality of starvation all around the world? At first glance, it looks like a total contradiction. Okay, so how does the author, Nursî, get around this? Well, his answer is not what you'd expect at all. It's going to make us completely rethink what it even means to die of hunger. So here's the core argument, and it's a bold one. The text basically says nobody actually dies from a simple lack of food. Now, I know that sounds wild, but there's a specific biological reasoning behind this claim. The whole idea is that our bodies are built with their own emergency stash of food, body fat. And the text claims this reserve can last a really long time. We're talking 40 days, maybe even up to 70 in some cases. And to back this up, the author points to a newspaper story from his time about a man in a London prison who supposedly went over 70 days without eating. Okay, and this is where the argument takes a really interesting turn. If our bodies can last that long, why do some people die way sooner? Well, Nursî's idea is that the cause of death isn't running out of fuel. It's actually the shock to the body's system when its routine, its habit, is suddenly broken. The body gets sick because its whole rhythm has been thrown into chaos. And this quote from the text just nails it. The abandoning of habit is fatal. It completely reframes the whole thing, right? The cause of death isn't an external lack of food, it's an internal physiological crisis. So from this point of view, the divine promise didn't fail. The body's own systems just couldn't handle the radical change. Then, this idea gets expanded into this really cool principle you see in nature. The less power and will a creature has, the easier it gets its food. Think about it. A fetus in the womb, it has zero power, and it's fed perfectly directly. A baby has a little more power, and food comes pretty easily through its parents. But once we're adults, with our own power and free will, well, now we have to go out and actively find our own sustenance. All right, so the text takes this same method, this idea of looking deeper than the surface, and applies it to something even bigger. We're shifting from biology to cosmology now. The Qur'an talks about 7 heavens and 7 earths. And you can imagine how that clashes with what modern science tells us about our single planet in one big universe. So this is the verse that's right at the center of the whole debate. For centuries, people had different ideas about what it meant. But once modern astronomy and geography came along, it really became a sticking point. How do you possibly line this up with what we know today? And here's the key. This is the big idea for how to solve this. Instead of trying to force one single literal meaning onto the verse, the text suggests that these kinds of scriptures are built to have multiple layers of meaning, all at the same time. And each layer is true for a different audience, a different level of understanding. And we see this exact principle put to work right here. The phrase 7 levels of the earth isn't just one thing. For folks in early geography, maybe it meant the 7 climes. For us today, it could be the 7 continents. For a geologist, it might be the 7 layers from the core to the crust. Or for a mystic, it could be 7 unseen spiritual worlds. The point is, each one of these is seen as a valid angle on a much bigger, multidimensional truth. Okay, so with that interpretive tool in our back pocket, the author now uses it on the even bigger, more abstract idea of the 7 heavens. And he contrasts this way of thinking with both ancient and modern views. What the author does is frame the Quran's view as this perfect middle way. On one side, you had ancient philosophy that went to this wild excess, imagining these 9 strange fixed spheres in the sky. On the other end, you have modern science, which, in the author's view, went to a deficiency by just denying the heavens' existence altogether. The Quran's approach, it's in the middle. 7 levels where planets swim freely. And then he builds this really fascinating argument, blending theology with a concept from early physics called ether. So the logic goes something like this. First, space isn't just an empty vacuum. It's filled with this substance. Second,
This ether is what carries things like light, heat, and gravity. Third, just like water can be ice, liquid, or steam, this ether can exist in different states or levels. And finally, divine power shaped this ether, crafting it into 7 distinct levels, the 7 heavens.
And this really gets to the heart of it all. The phrase 7 heavens isn't one static thing, it's dynamic. So for a person just looking up at the sky, it could mean the atmosphere. For an ancient astronomer, it's the 7 known planets. For a modern student, maybe it points to 7 layers of the solar system. For a mystic, it's 7 unseen worlds. You see? The whole idea is that one single verse is brilliantly designed to speak a relevant truth to every single one of them, right where they are. So when we step back from all this, the point isn't really to argue about whether the science from a text written in the early 20th century is correct today. That's not it. The real takeaway, the big idea here, is the method of interpretation itself. It's about what this tells us about the very nature of these secret texts.
And this is the incredible conclusion that the 12th flash presents. The true genius of a sacred text isn't that it gives you one single, literal scientific answer. No, its real power, according to this view, is that it can hold many truths at once, that it can offer deep meaning to a person living in the 7th century, and at the same time, to a scientist living today.
And that leaves us with a pretty provocative question, doesn't it? If a single text can be designed to be a fountain of many valid meanings instead of just one answer, what does that say about our own search for a single exclusive truth? It really challenges us to think maybe truth itself isn't a single point, but something layered, multifaceted, and way, way deeper than any one of us can ever see on our own.